and welcome to County Board Wrap-Up. I'm Kara O'Donnell, and this is our monthly look at the decisions made by the Arlington County Board that affect you, your neighborhood, and our community. Joining us for our final show of 2018 is County Board Chair Katie Crystal, and joining us also today is Board Member John Weistad. Thank you both for being here and making time during this very busy holiday season as we wrap up the year. And because this is the last show of the year, we're going to take a few minutes to just take a look back on the highlights of 2018, and then we'll look ahead to what's coming in the new year. So let's get started. It's been a heck of a year. 2018 really has been.
So many things across the board. I mean, new facilities, Lover Run Community Center started construction, economic development, of course, the A word, Amazon, but also Ballston Quarter coming online in time for your holiday shopping. Not everything is open, but moving along.
Right. I was over there the other day, and it looks really neat. It's going to be fun when it's completed.
Oh, the other thing, honestly, is the observation deck
really
atop CEB Tower. I mean, what phenomenal views, free to Arlingtonians, 24 or 360 degrees view sheds, phenomenal.
Yeah, it really is. Well, let's take a little deeper dive for those who may be, haven't been keeping up. I'm not really sure how you could possibly not know the details of the A word, as you say, John. But this was, of course, the big news for our county, that Amazon selected Arlington from more than 200 cities and communities from around the continent, actually, to be a location for its new headquarters. What does this really mean for the county overall?
Well, it's not every day that Arlington makes national headlines, right, or international headlines, as the case may be. And I think the attention paid to Amazon and their decision has really elevated to the fore some existing issues we had in our community. On the one hand, the high rates of office vacancy, which, as my colleagues and I have been talking about for probably 2 or 3 years at this point, have been a real drag on our budget, forcing some difficult conversations. Amazon presents an exciting opportunity to address that high office vacancy rate and help revitalize a critical set of neighborhoods in our county, in the Crystal City and Pentagon City area. But it's also shown a spotlight on some longstanding challenges in this community, the top of which I think has to be affordability. Folks are really concerned, whether they're renters, homeowners interested in the potential assessments on their housing going up, or others interested in general high costs of living and what that could mean for the future of our community. I think Amazon has really shown a spotlight on those issues. I think we've got a good policy infrastructure in place to deal, but this is really, I think, going to be an opportunity for our community, for the board, to step up and identify some of the new policies, more innovative approaches, and all hands-on-deck attitudes that we'll need to protect Arlington as a place for people at all levels of the income class.
Well, and honestly, Katie, I mean, the big ideas roundtables, which you initiated earlier in the year, spotlighted, I think, the hopes as well as the anxieties that a lot of folks have in Arlington about managing our growth. What comes next in an increasingly urbanized jurisdiction right across from the nation's capital?
Let's talk a little more about, thank you for the segue, Jen, on the big idea roundtables. Yeah. This was really something new for the county and really kind of gave our residents, our community, a chance to have their voices heard in a whole new way.
Absolutely.
Talk about what you all learned and what staff learned from these big idea roundtables.
What I loved about it was, we get in our little echo chambers, our pods, our bubbles with like communities. And the roundtables afforded people the opportunity to engage with folks they never would have discussed issues with. Yeah. People of diametrically opposing views, maybe people with nuanced views or little different perspectives, but really it was kind of a melting pot of different demographics, different perspectives, different ideologies, and in all conversing in a very civil way with each other. Absolutely. And staff.
And one of the motivating things for me in wanting to bring these big idea roundtables together was that our processes can sometimes require highly specialized knowledge in order to give input. And that can exclude people who don't have the time or the wherewithal to engage in a detailed conversation about the ways in which the zoning ordinance should be amended with regard to setbacks for exterior accessory dwellings, right? They know that they have an opinion about how their neighborhood looks and feels, or whether their child's school is too crowded, or whether there are enough parks to meet their needs. But to ask them to follow along on those highly detailed public policy processes is sometimes a bridge too far. People have lives, jobs, families, etc. So it was really exciting to have this chance to say to somebody, to say to our whole community, we don't actually need you to have read the comprehensive plan or a board report on a policy document. This is just a chance to share how you're feeling, what you're worried about, what you're excited about on this big question of how Arlington should grow. The flip side of such an open-ended conversation is that there's not one policy we're considering where we were getting feedback. So there's been a great query there about, well, what's next, right? Where will we see our feedback show up? And we may not be able to point and say, well, we're doing the request to advertise on the following zoning ordinance amendment, and we appreciate your comments. You'll see them at this date. But I think hearing such a rich dialogue among our community members couldn't help but shape our thinking, certainly on the affordability and diversity piece, which we've already talked about a little bit, but also on the sort of need, I would say one of my big takeaways, the need to think more creatively about community facilities to make sure that it feels like we have the infrastructure, not only the hard infrastructure of transit and roads, but the what you might call the softer infrastructure, human services, schools, and beyond to keep up with our growth.
Well, community centers, fire stations. The other reason why I think it was so successful is because we really penetrated all communities in the county. People didn't have to schlep to 2100 Clarendon Boulevard. We had these sessions in community centers, libraries, north, south, east, and west. We really brought the conversation into the neighborhoods. And I think that's going to be a challenge in the years ahead, frankly, is how we can engage populations that, they don't have time on their hands, 2 and 3 jobs, young kids, transportation issues and so forth. How can we really engage at really almost the block level with folks?
And what did you hear from those who participated? Not necessarily on specific issues per se, but about the experience as a whole. Did they find it valuable?
About participating. I think so. I think so. On balance, there were definitely. My favorite part about it was hearing people who hadn't participated in a public process before, saying that this was an opportunity for them to learn from their neighbors and maybe whet their appetite for more engagement. I think there are always folks who maybe would like to have seen a little more concrete action come out of it. But I don't think I heard from anybody who said that they didn't think it was worth their time to come out, share their thoughts, and hear from their neighbors.
And I would just say one more thing, and that is, and I made a plug at the several that I helped moderate, and that is, especially for people who were doing something like this for the first time, kick your civic engagement up a notch. Apply to be on a county board or county manager advisory body or commission, and channel that those ideas and that commitment to engage, regardless of what issues you might be interested in, on an ongoing basis, and not just make it one shot.
Right. And that's actually another big change we saw this year is the county's true commitment to civic engagement. We adopted that new template for civic engagement, and I think we're seeing staff, the board members, everyone out in the community a lot more. Why the focus on that?
Well, one of the things that I think our new civic engagement template is helping us achieve is some predictability for our processes, some set of what the expectations are. One of the things that we heard often from community members is it's frustrating to be told to show up and give your input if the areas in which you want to give an input have already been decided. Similarly, you might have people who just want to give a quick off-the-cuff reaction, and if a public process is going to require them to participate as part of a working group for 2 years, it's a level of engagement that isn't manageable for them or their schedule. And so being really predictable, and one of the major things that this new framework does is create levels of engagement. So when somebody shows up at a community center to give input on what the new Lubber Run should look like, they know, here's where I fall. This is how my input will be used. This is a level of engagement that I can expect out of this evening or morning of my time. So I think that was part of the reason it was so important, is so to clarify expectations and make sure people felt like their time was being honored and respected, and that everyone had the same level of expectations.
Yeah, the only other thing I would say is, to Katie's point, that we've created a hierarchy of civic engagement. So there's obviously going to be things like routine utility work, where it's going to be kind of a communication, as opposed to, gee whiz, folks, do you really want your meter replaced or not? All the way up to really communicate, engage, conversation, dialogue over a period of time, say, for, you know, where a new public facility might be.
And how have you, as board members, found that new kind of information? Is it information you perhaps wouldn't have had before, and how are you using that?
I think we need to embrace new technologies to get the word out and to engage, you know, streaming, online communication. You know, we got rid of the citizen this year, and it was painful because we had to make some difficult decisions and budget cuts. And you know, the more we can do online, the more we can do with Arlington Independent Media, with Arlington TV, and other technologies to have conversations and dialogue with folks, the better.
And I think one of the things that we are really challenged by as we grow as a population and as the sort of body of work that the county board and county staff are taking on increases is being able to make decisions ultimately and not be so bound up in our processes that we can't move forward. That's a theme I hear actually from a lot of community members, that, you know, the Arlington way has to become more nimble and more agile. What might have worked for a community of 100,000 people is not going to work for a community of nearly 250,000, for example. What I think is valuable about the civic engagement template is it allows us to evaluate whether the process has been fair or not. There is always a difference between being heard and getting the outcome that you prefer. And so being able to critically evaluate whether people have had fair opportunities to raise critiques, we hope make projects better, allows the board to ultimately make a decision and stick by it.
Okay. Now another issue, Katie, this one is primarily for you. This was kind of your pet project, was the child care initiative.
That's right.
Tell me where that's been going in the last year.
I think somebody jokingly called it my baby, which induced groans, right, for the pun on the child care. I am so excited about how much progress our child care initiative has been able to make this year. We have an extraordinary group that draws from truly dozens of different civic organizations, civic associations, nonprofits, bodies of the county, agencies expanding from parks to schools to human services to economic development and planning. We have a really robust agenda and work plan developed based on extensive community surveys of providers about what they most needed, the biggest obstacles. And the board endorsed or accepted that work plan in the middle of the year. A lot of those administrative improvements, outreach to landlords, for example, to encourage them to allow their tenants to offer in-home daycare, which we knew was a huge need in our more multifamily areas of the county. A lot of that work is already underway. Some of it, in fact, is done, which is really exciting. So for anyone interested, you can follow that at the Child Care Initiative, simply searching that phrase on arlingtonva.us. And there are policy steps left to do. So this is the 2018 issue that will bridge into 2019. Early in next year, we'll be considering amendments to both our zoning ordinance and our child care codes, which are the codes generally owned by human services that regulate the provision of child care. It's an opportunity to address what we specifically heard from providers and parents are some of the biggest obstacles to the expansion or creation of quality child care spots in the community. We are, for example, the most restrictive locality in Northern Virginia, in fact, the DC region, on the number of child care spots that a qualified in-home provider can offer. There's an opportunity for us to think afresh about that, as well as some of the land use issues surrounding childcare. So I hope this will be on folks' minds headed into the year, where we're going to have the second of two large community open houses in early January, and people can see how much progress has been made and the legislative considerations that remain ahead.
Okay.
And, you know, and I would just note that quality available childcare is also very important for our economic development. I mean, it's important for businesses, and it's important for people who are thinking, okay, am I going to take that job in Arlington if I want childcare close to my place of business as opposed to where I live? That's going to be a consideration for me.
Absolutely. So I'm sure we've not heard the end of that. We'll only continue to grow from there. Now, another thing we talked about quite a bit throughout the year, I believe we even commented that we seem to talk about it every month, is the 4 Mile Run Valley Master Plan. And we took some big strides towards the end of the year here and to kind of plan for the future of that region. What can our residents look to find along 4 Mile Run Valley?
What you're going to be able to see, I think, in a few years is really some big changes, but on the other hand, some things that aren't going to change a whole lot. In other words, this is really along 4 Mile Run, one of the last remaining significant areas of light industrial zoning in the county. We need to preserve those small businesses, many of which are either owned by new Americans or certainly employ a lot of immigrants and ethnic populations. We need to keep that as part of our community in order to be economically sustainable. Shirlington Dog Park. Everybody loves the dog park. It's the biggest dog park in the county. It's heralded across the metro area, and it's engendered dog spas and doggy daycare and so forth. That's important for our economy. So we're looking to preserve those industrial areas. At the same time, we are putting a lot of money, over $16 million in the current CIP, into Jenny Dean Park, which historically was the only park in Arlington County that was available to African Americans. And when you think about that historical legacy, we want to make sure that the new Jenny Dean Park calls on that legacy and reminds folks of how far we've come as a county.
And of course, we can't kind of end up the year without talking about another kind of institution, as it were, and that's the expansion of Virginia Hospital Center. Now, there was some controversy about this expansion and what it all entailed. But what does this mean for Arlingtonians moving forward, this opportunity to expand the hospital?
Absolutely. Well, listen, this is a great example of how we're going to grow and meet the needs of a growing population in ways that are consistent with what people love about Arlington County. In this case, a neighborhood that feels more lower to scale, walkable, et cetera. These issues will be in tension with one another, and I think we saw that very clearly throughout the hospital deliberations. The board voted once to defer, to ask the hospital to please plan their expansion in a way that better respected good principles of planning, created more light and air connectivity, but for pedestrians, et cetera. They came back, and we did differ. It was a divided vote on the board about whether the plan had gone far enough. Ultimately, this is a hospital that serves Arlington County. It's the only major hospital we have within our borders, and it is, in the same way that many of our physical facilities are, greatly over capacity. So this is a much needed expansion, but it's not a perfect outcome, I think, in terms of the design of that facility. It will, however, allow for a critical expansion of services, a better patient experience for the many Arlingtonians who use the hospital. And that's the last comment I'd make on it is, we heard all along plenty of criticism and concern, but nearly all of that criticism and concern was prefaced by folks saying, I use the hospital, my family relies on it, and it does need to grow. So it was really a question of how this hospital would grow rather than whether or should, which I think the board and the community across the board agree that it must.
Well, and honestly, we have, as Katie noted, there was a range of perspectives on the board, which I think is a healthy thing, and I hope it continues. But it's also emblematic of a tension that we find with respect to siting a fire station. Where are we going to put the new community center, or how big is it going to be? What are the impacts on the exterior, the outside of the neighborhood, as well as what goes on inside the building? But in conclusion, I would note Virginia Hospital Center is the #3 employer in Arlington County, over 3,000 employees. It's a phenomenal asset, and we're looking forward to a long and productive relationship moving forward.
It truly is an integral part of the community here. Well, I feel like we've only scratched the surface of the many things. It's been a heck of a year, but we're going to need to take a short break. But when we return, we're going to talk about the role the public played this year in putting together Arlington's 2019 General Assembly legislative package. Stay with us. Welcome back. I'm here with County Board Chair Katie Crystal and Board Member John Weistad as we take one last look at the key actions the board took at its December 2018 meeting, the last meeting of the year. So let's do a quick, before we get into some specifics, let's just kind of continuing what we talked about from the last segment, looking ahead to some of the big issues that will continue into 2019. I know as we've been talking about things like the Amazon deal, it's brought up things like growth, affordable housing, some of those big issues that I know are going to be big priorities for the coming year.
Yeah, I think, affordability remains absolutely a top one. We were talking about the childcare affordability is piece of it we'll bridge, and then certainly with regard to housing, needing to make more progress on our affordable housing master plan, more opportunities, I hope, to engage some new partners, perhaps from the private sector, in the preservation or creation of new affordable housing in the county, as well as continuing to implement key tenets of our affordable housing master plan, like the housing conservation districts or parts of our accessory dwelling, i.e. those small outside the house additional units of housing. We'll have a vote on the Amazon incentive package. I think as our community has sort of learned with us over time, it's a relatively small investment grant from Arlington to Amazon. So it may not be this sort of major point of leverage or decision point. On Amazon, it's only about $1.5 million a year of grant to them, but it's an opportunity to reflect on the infrastructure package we put together, those investments in ourselves, and surface more of what will be happening in the Crystal City and Pentagon City area in terms of transportation and transit in particular. So there'll be a good conversation about that. Likely in February, that'll come before the board vote. And between now and then, we know that there are definitely some segments in the community that are either upset about the Amazon deal in particular because of concerns about the company, or just have a lot of very reasonable questions and good feedback for us on the related issues like affordability, transit, et cetera. So I think it's fair to say that this big news will keep driving the conversation for at least the first half of 2019. The one thing that unfortunately the Amazon news will not drive or change is the budget outlook for fiscal 20. So we're really pleased that Amazon is part of a solution to, again, shoring up that high commercial vacancy or office vacancy rate, which has led to a sort of drag on our budget, and resultingly a budget gap. But we won't see those revenues for another couple of years. So we are unfortunately in for a challenging conversation about our fiscal 20 budget, knowing that our revenues, again, largely because the office vacancy, aren't keeping pace with the growth in expenditures for county and schools both. We'll have a series of hard conversations again. I suspect it's going to be a budget with cuts that community members don't want to see, perhaps paired with tax increases that no one's enthusiastic about either. So we're going to try to do this in a way that reflects good stewardship of our core values and is always as inclusive as possible, having real conversations with community members about trade-offs. But I don't think any of us are particularly rosy on the budget year ahead.
Yeah, and I would just say now's the time for people at home to continue their engagement with respect to the budget. There's online opportunities to communicate to the manager and the county board with respect to the budget outlook. There's opportunities within the commissions where we're tapping their perspectives and so forth. So be a part of that conversation with the budget, because we want to hear all voices and all perspectives. And I appreciate the chair's remarks about affordability, because certainly with respect to the budget, if we're going to be talking about various property tax or a property tax increase versus a utility tax increase, or some combination, or where we cut, where we add, what we can do, we want everybody to be engaged. And I think, frankly, it was a big help just last month when we decided for the first time in quite some time to carry over 75% of the current fiscal year's surplus, rather than spending it right away, to put it into the mix for the next budget year so we can consider all competing priorities in a contemporaneous manner.
Sure. Now, you've also been getting some public input on the General Assembly legislative package. We've talked about this several times, but this is after you've really had a chance to get that input.
Absolutely. That's what's different between last month and this month. Is last month we had the public hearing, which was, I wouldn't say neither ended nor started our public engagement process, because our package is developed with the insight of, or the draft package is developed with the insight of the commissions and some public comments. But I think having that hearing really touches off a lot more engagement from individual citizens or groups like our Civic Federation, which was quite active this year. And so in the month between November and December, we had a chance to dig into some of those suggestions they made. We also had a joint work session with our legislative delegation, which was a chance to get their reactions to some of the ideas. the likelihood of certain prospects or that certain bills might have of passing in this year's General Assembly session, where Arlington could most effectively add our support or add our voice. So it was, I think, an unusually highly participatory year in terms of developing that package, which was a really positive thing. You know, just to point to a couple of examples, the inclusion of our support for the Equal Rights Amendment really, I think, was driven by a ton of community engagement and support for that, which is really exciting to see.
Well, and only one more state is needed for ratification, and wouldn't it be phenomenal where Virginia's place is in the heart of American history for the Commonwealth to take us over the line?
Absolutely,
that would be pretty cool.
And the other example too of something in our legislative package as a result of that public engagement or that conversation process is that we added a lot more specificity to the provisions that we support around net metering, which is a key tool for achieving environmental sustainability with solar in particular, as well as other alternative energy forms. So we added a lot more specificity at the request of the Sierra Club, our E2C2 Advisory Commission, and in partnership with our General Assembly, who told us this was an opportunity for us to get a little more specific and add our voices to a growing coalition around some net metering reforms.
Well, and so, I mean, I think that's a perfect example of how our legislative package, it's not just about asking Richmond for more money, it's also asking Richmond for more authority, more flexibility, local control to do the things that we prioritize as a community. And honestly, what we're asking for in this package is very consistent with the priorities of the Virginia Association of Counties, on which I served on the board. You're on the board of the Virginia Municipal League, VML. So this is really, in large part, consistent with what other localities are looking to do across the Commonwealth.
And what are some of the kind of early news we're seeing coming out of Richmond?
Absolutely. So it's going to be a short session, which is to say not a budget session. That said, there have been some real changes in the revenue picture for the state. I have to say I'm a little envious at a time when our revenue picture is looking a little less positive. The state is awash in new sources of revenue. The budget revenue picture is coming back rosier than was predicted with the biennial budget, on top of which there have been some major federal actions. The judicial decision on the Wayfair case, which will present new revenues to the state coming from internet sales taxes, and then some somewhat complicated intergovernmental impacts of the federal tax policy bill essentially means that the state is also looking at new revenue. So the General Assembly this year has the enviable task of trying to figure out what to do with more money. And so, we'll be continuing to make the case. And actually, we're really pleased to see Governor Northam's proposal that some of that money goes back into core services like schools and transportation in particular. Arlington is really exceeds expectations in terms of the levels of funding that we have for roads, transportation, and education coming out of our local dollars, but we really need the state to be a partner. And so we're excited to see that the governor's made that the case, and we hope the General Assembly will be following his lead.
Okay, well, and another big thing, I can't let us end without talking about the project of making Wilson Boulevard a little more walkable. This is something we hear about over and over again from our residents. It's a main thoroughfare for Arlington, but it's also one that's very heavily trafficked by foot.
Absolutely.
So what are the plans that we're going to see moving forward?
So we're embarking on the third phase of a four-phase continuum, if you will, to make Wilson Boulevard, like so many of our arterials, a complete street. We want our streets to be accommodating to all modes of transportation, ranging from pedestrians to cyclists to automobile drivers as well as to buses and scooters as well, maybe. So this is the third phase. It's going to be starting soon, we always try on our website, by the way, so if people want more details, they can go to our website, plug in Wilson Boulevard, see all the details right there.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I think is great about this project, which is going to improve Wilson Boulevard between North Monroe Street and Kenmore Street, as John mentioned, it's phase 3 of 4, that those pedestrian improvements that he was describing so well are also for pedestrians of all abilities as well as on all modes. So there'll be a new ADA compliant crossing at North Kenmore Street and Wilson Boulevard. Those will have rapid flashing beacons to increase visibility. I think one of the things that we learn over and over again is that when we try to design design our streets for universal use, for people who are comfortable on 2 feet or might be in a wheelchair or navigating some other type of device. It makes a more inclusive street for everyone. We're excited to see that happen.
Street lights, new street lights in parts, curb extensions, and so forth. But here again, another opportunity for community engagement. We have the Neighborhood Complete Streets Commission. We have the Transportation Commission. The manager has a Transit Advisory Committee, a Pedestrian Advisory Committee, and a Bicyclist Advisory Committee.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that pretty much brings us to the end. We have a lot of things to look forward to in 2019. And John, I do just want to take a moment and thank you for your service. This is John Weistadt's final appearance here on Board Wrap as you are stepping down from the board. We wish you all the best in future endeavors, and I am sure you will remain very active in civic affairs moving forward.
Thanks, Kara. I've really enjoyed my service on the board. When one door closes, others open.
That's right. That's right. So I'm sure we have not seen the last of you around Arlington County. That's going to be it for us today. Thank you for joining us for a review of 2018 and the issues discussed and decided by the County Board at its December meeting to wrap up the year. Thank you once again, Katie and John, for offering your insights today. And remember, all of our county board meetings are open to the public and live streamed and archived on our website. Just go to arlingtonva.us and search County Board. And if you want to tell us what you think about these and other issues, visit our county website, topics.arlingtonva.us/engage. I'm Kara O'Donnell, and we'll see you next year right here on County Board Wrap.